To our first keynote address from our good friends at Airlock Digital, asking how attackers play the endpoint and how to break the game. We're joined by the co-founder of Airlock Digital. This person's a proven cybersecurity innovator who leads the R&D function designed to take the application control business and solution to the next level. Has previously worked at security provider EMT and distribution and technical director at GFI Software. So keen he's run up here on stage. Please give a big round of applause to the one and the only Daniel Schell. Daniel, all yours, mate.
Thanks, mate. Thank you. Hi, everyone. So on today's presentation, what I'm wanting to do is sort of talk about how attackers play the endpoint and how to break the game. Now, for the audio-visual guys, I don't know if you've got the notes up. Sorry, everyone. Got OpenBSD here. But at the end of the day, what we're trying to work out is like looking at the endpoint from the attacker perspective. So what we're trying to achieve there is when we look at it that way, rather than looking at a defensive list of controls and stuff like that, we're able to slow it down and be able to, sorry, in this case, yeah, take a different break. All that. I also don't have a clicker. It's a bit of a quicker run on. All right, I might need some help from the AV guys here. All right, cool. So yeah, so defenders think in terms of detecting and responding to threats, but in this talk, I want to talk about removing classes or capabilities altogether from attackers. Okay, cool. So the rules have always been, and if we go back like the endpoint, first we have to sort of start with the endpoints. Sorry, I've been thrown off. First we have to start with the endpoint. My apologies. We have to start with the endpoint security lifecycle. So the rules have always been that if an attacker succeeds in executing code on the system, they win. And we've always relied on AV to prevent the execution of unknown code using signatures. But signatures were kind of like the flu shot, where it was always for last year's strain, so it was all reactive. And attackers were just generating more and more malware through malware factories. So what happened is that the industry shifted towards EDR. And then instead of focusing on bad signatures detected behaviors, it was more on the behaviors being blocked. So modern tools so today, EDR tools are very effective, and they get it right most of the time. However, attackers only have to succeed once, and that's kind of the asymmetry in endpoint, where the security is stacked against the defenders because they need to get it right all of the time. Go to the next slide. I don't know if I can get this clicker working, otherwise we're going to have some trouble going forward. So classic malware was simple. And people, OK, we're jumping ahead now too much. So classic malware was simple, and it started by sending out a phishing email, for example, which would then send it, and the attacker would run the phishing email and run the code, and then that would be game over. However, to try and avoid detection today, attackers chain together all of the small individual actions to try and fly under the radar. And what they're doing there is not as a single action by itself is malicious enough to raise the alarm, but in aggregate, the chain allows the attacker to achieve their objectives by gaining code execution. Okay, it's working now. So rather than trying to comprehend the whole chain at once, what we can do is we can break it down into the foundational requirements. And the first requirement is simple. The attacker needs to get code onto the actual endpoint. And this might happen through the browser download, an email, or any sort of other deployment method. And this is one of the attacker's required success criteria. Before they can execute code, they need to find a way to get it down to the machine. And the next foundational requirement is code execution. What they need to do in this case is to get the computer to do something, you need to run code. So this is the main win condition for any attack. So if the attacker manages to get arbitrary code execution, they've won the game. And once we understand that downloading and execution is a foundational requirement, we can start looking at ways that individual techniques that underlie these. So for example, in this case, we're looking at assembly reflection, which is a code execution technique that can be used to load code in a way that's difficult to detect. And the more that we can remove or constrain lower-level techniques or like attacker moves, the more likely we will be able to prevent the entire classes of attack. So ideally, what we want to do is deny the attacker access to the foundational requirements. And yeah, thinking about this as moves, as in like a Street Fighter or fighting game, is a good way to position this. So as defenders, we often focus on recognizing the move after it's happened. But another approach is to deny the move entirely, because it changes the game. And instead of trying to detect every possible payload, then we can start reducing the attacker's finite move set. So today's endpoint security meta is where the endpoint security vendors need to keep up with the entire move list, all the attack combos, and keep building detection around these, whereas attackers keep trying to find new attack methods and combos of complex attack chains to avoid detection. And then for the defenders, they're just generally overwhelmed keeping up with the day-to-day horrors in the daily news feed. So what we're seeing again is that the current endpoint detection meta is shifting again. Defenders have gotten better at preventing malware, which is great. And attackers have found that getting a foothold now is even more important than just having really cool malware. The foothold is now becoming the harder part. And for a long time, the attackers felt distinct, different. They all had their own tooling, malware, tradecraft, and habits. And you can also think of these as kind of like, again, game characters. Each one had their own move lists and unique capabilities. And if you watch closely enough in the past, you can sometimes work out who you were dealing with and respond accordingly based on what you know about that sort of attacker group. But today, we're seeing convergence. All of the attackers are increasingly using the same moves over and over again because they work. And they're starting to lose their unique flavor through their different behaviors. So now I want to walk you through 3 attacker moves that are currently being used in the wild and talk about practical ways that we can counter them. So these are ones that we definitely see every day. We have customers coming to us and saying, hey, what do you know about this? How can we control these? So the current move that's really in fashion at the moment is click-fix. And click-fix is really simple, and that's part of why it works. What they're really doing here is the attacker is tricking the user to run a command through the Windows Run dialog box. And this technique turns the user into an execution mechanism. And what I'll do now is actually show you, and I'll show you for each of these 3 attacks, the end-user experience of what this looks like. So in this case, the click fix is going to be delivered through a malvertising campaign on my internet's favorite homepage, msn.com. So if you come in here and click on the actual ad the user does, they'll get the Cloudflare turnstile here that users have been trained for years to be able to, yep, I verify for security, I'm not a bot. But in this case, it's sort of a custom prompt. And what we're seeing here is the user getting instructions to, hey, hit Windows key run, and paste and run the command. And in this case, they sort of follow the instructions. It's pretty easy to do. Think it's OK. In this case, a script kicks off. Malware is being deployed and run. The user goes, OK, cool. It succeeded now. And they continue, and they get redirected onto their next effort. Now, this nearly seems like joke simplicity, but I can tell you it works. Currently, I've got a customer of 200,000 endpoints plagued by this, trying to work out how to get controls into click-fix malware. So the counter for click-fix, and there's plenty of them, but probably the main bang-for-buck one that people can actually do today is actually, in most enterprises, remove the actual run dialog box. So in many cases, for end users, they don't need to run the run button. They don't need to push Windows key R. Maybe admins are similar. And what you can do is go into group policy and just turn it off. And this takes sort of the move away from the attacker because the user will try to follow the instructions, and they will be unable to actually put that into place. The next thing that we're seeing a lot of, particularly in the financial sector, is click-once malware. And attackers abuse this built-in Windows functionality by luring users to click a link that deploys an application from a browser using the Windows, the deployment fulfillment service. And what's really important about this move is that attacker is actually abusing a trusted deployment system mechanism that users really aren't that familiar with, and often IT security teams and similar haven't really encountered before. So again, we're going to show you the end-user experience here of this attack. And in this case, the lure comes in for a phishing email. We've seen some really good phishing emails crafted to the actual employee's work, like what they're working on, the project, and similar. The user goes, fine, I've got my email. I want to access this data room. They push OK, open. I'm going to kick this off. And you see sort of this weird world dialog prompt, and then there's like a run button. And there might be a warning, or it could be trusted. But in this case, what's happened is an application has actually been deployed to that machine and run. And the application, we've seen it both ways. Either the application itself is malicious, or it's a legitimate application which has malicious dependencies injected into it. And just that deployment method is very effective. And normally what would happen after that is that maybe their browser would pop up a prompt or something like that, or redirect them saying, hey, there was an error, or everything, or show them a fake document. They go, that's not what I wanted anyway. So in this case, to counter click once, this is another option where you have the opportunity to use group policy, this time using a browser extension, to actually deny this capability. So to make the browsers not run these codes. And with any security decision, sometimes it's like, well, is this going to affect users or have other impact? But generally not. Click once was popular maybe 10 years ago. There's not too many vendors using it now. We did an audit recently at a too-big-to-fail bank, about 200,000 users, and they had 2 unique click once applications used by 3 users. So it's pretty easy to silo it up and deny that capability to everyone else. And then the third one, and this is sort of all the rage at the moment, is supply chain compromise. And supply chain attacks are effective because they exploit assumptions. Users assume that they're downloading legitimate software, and the IT department also assumes that the vendor distribution channels are secure, where they might not do. So attackers are abusing that trust. And in this example, the vendor website can be, or their auto-update channels can be compromised. The attacker places the malicious code on the way, and then either the users manually deploy, IT deploys, or the actual auto-update functionality within the app will update the software. So we saw this last month. There's a very popular utility with hardware enthusiasts called CPU ID that shows you all of the CPU properties and performance of your system. And in this case, the end user experience again is that the user just goes to grab the tool. Maybe they've just built a new PC. Click on the zip file to download the software. And what they've done, they've actually changed the link to go to infrastructure that they control. So that's all they changed on the website. The user then downloads the file, executes the software. They have to extract it first because it's a zip. And what the attacker's done here is they've actually kept the original software, this is the actual CPU-Z application, but they've injected a DLL file into the zip, which has got to be automatically loaded on startup due to Windows dependency search order. So again, the second that application ran up, the computer was hosed for code execution. So that's been, there's been a lot of those in the last few months, pretty much one every week that I've been tracking. And then, I guess, what counters do we have here? And there's no single counter for supply chain at risk because there's so many different ways of doing it. But from an endpoint or software perspective, the best thing you can do is centralized deployment. There is always this race between I should patch a new version as soon as it comes out and how long is it to safe till it's been proven versus it having a vulnerability or similar. But this is a case where sometimes it's worth waiting or at least centrally managing the updates. The screenshot here is actually from Notepad++, very popular text document editor on Windows, which also had a vulnerability, has the auto-update system compromised a couple months ago. And our recommendation would really be to make sure that you also have configuration that auto-updating and stuff is disabled, and again, managed centrally. So wait for the software to be released, give it a couple weeks. Generally, if something's compromised, it pops up in the next week, assuming there's no critical vulns, and then upgrade when you have confidence that there's no problems. That's the official package. So the other control that helps in these situations is just least privilege. If not everyone is an admin of their machine, then that tool, for example, wouldn't even execute properly because it requires admin rights to even start. So that would be that. So you can sort of reduce the blast radius by making sure that people have the limited privilege, which is just a foundational principle of security anyway. So now we're looking at what's the modern defensive meta, and the takeaway here is to continue to let your endpoint security vendor do what they're good at, which is detecting malicious code and suspicious behaviors. But as defenders, we should be spending more time constraining what's actually possible on the endpoint in the first place. Security is ultimately about constraints, and if a capability is not needed, you should be removing it from the endpoint. The goal here is forcing the attacker to play by your rules and force them to invent new moves something that's much harder than just delivering new payloads through existing move channels. So sticking with the fighting game theme here, in the new defensive meta, another challenger has appeared, right? And that defender is you. We have to remember that the defender is also a player in the game. And the attackers has moves, but so do we. We can change the rules because we actually control the battlefield on the endpoint. We're not limited to reacting until after the attacker moves or starts a breach. We can prevent up front that whole capability of what they're going to do. And there's a bunch of strategies that we can use today that are focused on removing moves from the game. Firstly, application control. Its core capability is preventing execution of untrusted code. So that's a very effective control in this space. Execution restrictions are also something that's coming up a bit more, which is more about putting restrictions on trusted operating system files or law bins or similar, so they can only execute in approved manner. And then there's attack surface reduction as well, which is sort of the hardening capabilities that I sort of showed with the group policy and similar, which is, again, taking away attacker functionality through configuration. And then least privilege also is going to be helpful, again, reducing that blast radius of any attack by limiting the permission that if an attacker does get a foothold, they're going to be limited in what they can do. Cool. And just when you thought we were safe, another new challenger appears, and that's going to be the agentic challenger, right? So in this case, any agentic worker that's given an objective will work sort of relentlessly to achieve it. And although the objective might be benign, because it's generally controlled inside the organization, like a developer might be trying to fix some bugs or similar, it can also create a lot of risk. Because if the tool gets blocked or you start putting constraints around these agentic workers, they have all the knowledge of the attackers and the OS builders and everyone to get around them. So they will dynamically break out of jails that they're put into and work around controls in ways that you haven't even considered. And this type of adaptive behavior makes security constraints even more important, even though they try to work around them. So if the default security capabilities are too broad for workers, you may need to take actions to really, the workers may take actions that are going to be risky or can be costly as well, which is a new sort of dimension in the game where there's a cost of running these workers with the token usage and such, which can cause a sort of like a new threat, which leads to like a denial of service of the actual workers themselves when the organization runs out of tokens. When we started looking at this ourselves, we had a lot of lessons learned. We've deployed ChatGPT and Codex across the whole enterprise. And one of the first things we did was try to make some rules to say, hey, we don't want the ChatGPT to just deploy applications. So we're going to block winget. Let's try to do that. We won't let the ChatGPT worker install winget. And, Git through winget, which is a Windows deployment method. And what happened is that the attacker tried to go for winget. It said, great, I wasn't able to do that. We did celebration. And it said thinking 20 seconds. And then went, you know what, I'm going to sideload it. So it just pulled the portable version of the Git down, it extracted it, and put it into a folder. And not only that, it made little desktop icons, it made shortcuts, it made an add removes button so I could remove it from the registry. So it really went for the whole hog of installing it, even though it was just a portable application. And I mentioned cost before, and that's also another area which is sort of interesting or a new sort of thing to consider in this case, because really what we've found is that if you get everyone onto maybe the crack of ChatGPT, if it stops working, then you have the whole business riot. They definitely don't want to give it up after that time. And what Codex did in an update is they introduced something called fast mode. And when fast mode was enabled by default, and all our developers were just sort of working as normal, other people in the business were working as normal, but we straight away early in the morning hit our cap of daily tokens. And we're like, well, what's going on here? And it turns out that fast mode uses 2.5 times the actual token usage than regular mode. And so it took us quite a while, but we eventually found in the back end of the ChatGPT, we could say disable fast mode. It took us days to find that. But in the meantime, we had to spend a lot of money because people were just not prepared to work anymore without these tools that they had in their arsenal. So it's something to consider. It also made our budget go up a lot more. But eventually, we managed to turn off fast mode and got things a bit under control again. But it's just I find it just interesting because that doesn't happen with other tools like EDR or similar, where suddenly there's a big cost based on sort of usage in the organization. And in the background there, you can see there is a sort of some of the policy settings. So that's like the back end of ChatGPT. So you can say like try to restrict sudo and such, but it will be persistent and it will try. The other thing that was quite funny about the fast mode is that when we finally set it down to load, when the users then logged in the next day, it started popping up dialogues for them saying, hey, did you know if you had fast mode enabled, you would have saved 2 hours? So it sort of mocks us as well at the back end. And I think this is something that is emerging that I feel like the big vendors in this space are going to be dragging and screaming in letting us to put more configuration and more controls and quota management and similar around these. They're starting to slowly introduce these features, but I don't think they're in a rush, because it makes a lot of money for them in the meantime. So in summary, like our challenge really is to deny attackers the space to execute their favorite moves. And to change the game, we need to reduce the attacker's options before an attack even begins. Force them to find something that's genuinely new before they can actually become a real threat again. And if we achieve that, we will make the fight much harder for the attacker to win. Thank you.
We've got a gift for you, Daniel.
Oh, awesome.
Thank you very much. Little speakers gift there, a little gaming console so you can get your game on. Thank you so much. Give Daniel another big round of applause. Founder of Airlock Digital. He's got himself a lightsaber as well.
Yes. Come past the Airlock Digital booth. We've got tons of these. We don't want to take them back to Adelaide. Please
there you go. Go to see our friends at Airlock Digital. They are giving away lightsabers. They are not giving away samples of GPT crack, but they are giving away lightsabers. You take your app down to the exhibitors village there, go around and scan at a lot of the different places, go into the running for some great prizes. A couple of little bits of housekeeping as we go. A big thanks to Airlock Digital, they've got a store down there, and to all our sponsors. We simply can't put AusCert on for you every year without their wonderful support. As we move down to the exhibitors hall there, that's where our morning tea, lunch and afternoon tea are being served, a whole range of food there. There are a couple of tables labelled special dietary requirements. Can I stress, the special dietaries table is only for people with special dietary requirements. I know there's sometimes no queue and it looks really tasty. You are not allowed to go, guess I'm feeling a little bit gluten intolerant today. No, you're not. It's only for people who need special dietaries. After morning tea, we're going to break this big hall here into 3 separate rooms, so take everything with you. We assemble the doors down here, and please make sure you leave nice and quickly so we can get that done. And in a real nod to nostalgia, 20 years ago, Chris Gatford and the team at Hack Labs to celebrate their strength in penetration testing and overall protection. Very funny, they released special AusCert Hack Lab condoms. Ha ha ha. He's decided to bring them back. You can run down now, grab you. The first, I don't know how many he's got there. It's a little bit like the Olympic Village field down there at the moment. If you want to run down, the good people at Hack Labs are giving away. Just take one each. Only one each. Special Hack Lab protection condom. Airlock Digital down there as well. Go and see all our sponsors. One more round of applause, please, for Daniel Schell. Thank you so much, Daniel. We'll see you back here for the plenary this afternoon, but your after morning tea or often your concurrent sessions, all details on the app, or see the registration desk.